All right, natural selection. So let's talk about that. Natural selection, you've probably heard of that thing that I put in quotes. It says survival of the fittest. And when you think of something being fit, normally you think of something, washboard abs or really toned muscles, strong, can run really far. That's being fit. And that can very well be fit. But in some organisms, being really slow is what's fit, or being very, what we would call cowardly or fearful is very fit. So let's look at the definition. It says nature selects organisms that fill their niche. Remember, if you don't know what that word means, look it up. We've talked about it already. It's how an organism fits in their environment. Nature selects an organism that fills their niche the best. So that could be the strongest, the most fearful, the most defensive, the fastest, the most apt to flee, which means like they're gonna run really fast. Think of a deer or something that we would call like a scaredy cat or something. That's going to be the most apt to flee. So survival of the fittest. This word fit does not necessarily mean what we explain fit as being. It could mean any of these things, or dozens and dozens of other things. The one that fits in the best, the most camouflage, the sharpest teeth, the ones that digest food the most efficient. Like the word fit can have a lot of different, I guess, can look a lot of different ways. But that word fit means it fits into their environment the best. It fits in or fills their niche the best. So a shark's probably not going to fill the bird's niche very well, but another bird might, or a bat might. So anyway, so we'll talk about the moths of Manchester. You'll see this picture over here. Ask yourself, how many moths are in that picture? There's two moths in that picture. You see this obvious one right here, this black one, and then you see this one that's kind of a speckled moth. There's a moth right there. And so I don't know if you can see it here, but these are the moths of Manchester. So real quick, what happened with the moths of Manchester during the Industrial Revolution, which you may have talked about in social studies, when there's a lot of pollution being put into the sky. And that pollution ended up, there's a lot of soot, a lot of burning of coal. And near these industrial cities or these actual buildings, there were trees that look similar to this background. I believe this is a rock or a stone, but they had trees that were speckled. So these moths right here, the majority of the moths look just like this. And if you're a bird flying around looking at dozens of trees at one time, you're probably not going to see this moth. I mean, some of you may not have seen it, and it's the only picture on this whole screen. So it's very well camouflaged. Its ancestors, the ones that did not fit in, got eaten. So guess what's going to happen to this one? This one has a recessive gene that showed up. So this one maybe have a recessive gene, but it's got a dominant gene that makes it camouflage. This one has a different gene that makes it all black. Now, that doesn't mean the bird's going to see it. It's not going to stick out like a sore thumb. But if between these two, if a bird sees one of them, it's probably going to see this one way sooner than it'll see this one. It'll probably eat this one way sooner than it'll. Now, this one may taste the same, so it doesn't mind eating this. It's just the bird doesn't see it, so it can't eat it. And if any of you have gone hunting before, like for deer, you know that a deer could be right in front of you, literally 15 feet in front of you. And if it is still enough and you didn't see it walk up, you don't see that deer. So it's not hard to believe at all that a bird would not notice this. So what happened for the moths in Manchester, what happened is that soot started covering the trees, and these black moths started blending in a lot better than these speckled moths. These speckled moths started sticking out. So if you change the surface, the background for the tree, then and they turn it black, these moths would stick out. Would blend in, would be more camouflaged. They fit this niche better than this moth. So what started happening is, instead of, if you were to personify this and say, these moths always picked on these moths because they didn't fit in or they weren't the right color. Well, eventually these moths started having the niche, and they started making fun of these moths. Now again, moths, to our knowledge, that doesn't happen. Something much worse happens. They actually get eaten. So these moths started getting eaten way less, and these moths started getting eaten way more. So the population, remember the amount of one species in an area, the population of moths changed colors. There's way fewer of these moths and way more of these moths because they blend in better. So these moths had a better chance of reproducing And so those genes were passed on. So there's as moths are being born, there's higher and higher numbers of darker colored moths because they're the ones that reproduce. This one can't pass on its sperm or eggs, its genes, if it's dead or in the belly of a bird. So those are the moths of Manchester. There's an example of natural selection. We'll talk more about that later. If you'd like to, you can click on these. There are links throughout this. So this is a Google document, another Google document, and then there's a website that you can go to. So this is on the original website, or original slideshow. So if you want to look at it, you can. This will take you to just a larger picture of it, or you could just make it larger. And then these are another slideshow that we'll go through later. All right, let's keep going. This is what evolution is not. Evolution is not the evolving because something needs to happen. An animal or a plant or a bacteria or whatever, its desire to do better does not change it. So Lamarck was a guy that's kind of consider him something similar to Charles Darwin. Lamarck had this idea. It's called Lamarckism. It's easy enough to remember. Lamarckism. He said there was evolution by need. So because a giraffe needed to stretch its neck over time, as that giraffe got older, its neck got longer and longer. And then it passed on those longer neck genes to the next generation. So that would be like if you weren't very good at basketball, your genetics did not help you jump or shoot or run or whatever. And then you practice for your entire life, let's say for 20 or 30 years. Every day you practice a lot and you became excellent at free throws and three-pointers and dunking and all that as best you can. Well, when you have a baby, you pass on those genes to the next generation. That was what Lamarck thought, and that's wrong. That is not accurate. Regardless of how much you practice at basketball, your genes are what's going to be passed on to your children. It's not what you've learned or how stretchy you are, or give another example of if you were to do all those things, stretch and try to get better at something, your children are not going to have those same abilities unless those abilities are, I don't know why I highlighted it, unless those abilities are genetic. So Lamarckism says that giraffes over time can stretch their necks because they had the need to do that. And evolution, how we understand it now, would say the giraffes with the short necks, they're just going to die. And they're not going to be able to reproduce, where the giraffes with the long necks, they are going to be able to reproduce. Another example is what I have down here. It says, if a cat's tail gets chopped off and then has babies, will the kittens have tails? And the answer is yes. If the mom or the dad was born with the tail, then chances are that baby is going to have a tail. It getting cut off is not going to have anything to do with the child. Just like if you cut your hair really, really short, that doesn't mean your child's hair is going to be really, really short. Or if you dye your hair red, your child's hair is not going to be red. Because traits are passed down how? Through genes. Remember, those going back to the phenotype and genotypes. They're passed down through genes. So like I said, what Lamarck said is they had short necks and they stretched their necks over time and then passed on those long necks to the next generation. Darwin said there's a variety of lengths. The long neck giraffes, if that's a very fit gene, the long neck giraffes have food, make babies, pass on those genes. The short neck giraffes die because they don't have enough food. So what we call weak genes, it's the opposite of being fit. The weak genes die out. The strong genes are selected, and they're passed down to the next offspring, to the next generation, from parent to offspring. So natural selection occurs, which leads to a more fit species. Needs to be a very familiar term. Fit is the opposite of weak. And again, that doesn't mean brave or strong. It might, or brave is a horrible thing for a prey to have, like a herbivore. A deer that stands up to a wolf is going to get eaten and not pass on its genes to the next generation. So that's what evolution isn't and what it is. And we'll come back next time to talk about some evidences.